Well, good morning. Here we are at the last but one book, Alice Conyngam's War. This is set in the tense spring and summer of 1939, and this book follows Alice Conyngham, a young widow struggling to maintain her estate, Wheatcroft Manor, following the brutal murder of her husband. As the shadow of World War II looms over the English countryside, Alice faces immense pressure from her aristocratic parents to abandon her home and her beloved racing stables. Her confidant, Brantley Fuller, a former athlete now serving in MI5 due to injuries sustained during the same attack that killed Alice's husband, provides a grim perspective on the inevitable conflict. The text highlights the stark contrast between the lingering Victorian elegance of the landed gentry and the pragmatic, often harsh, wartime preparations, affecting everyone from domestic servants to livestock. Through detailed character studies, the story captures a society on the precipice of collapse, where personal grief intersects with a collective fear of invasion. Ultimately, Alice must decide whether to seek safety or remain loyal to the legacy and land her husband left behind. Alice Conyngam's War. I hope you enjoy the AI voices. And if you would like to like and subscribe and ring that bell, that'd be great. Enjoy.
In the summer of 1939, so this is months before a single German bomb actually fell on British soil.
Right, long before the Blitz.
Yeah, the British public voluntarily euthanized over 400,000 of their own pets.
Which is just a staggering number to even think about.
It's completely horrifying. I mean, we're talking about perfectly healthy dogs and cats just lined up outside veterinary clinics all across southern England, and they were put down by their owners who were in this state of just absolute preemptive panic.
Because the psychological terror of anticipation,
Right.
The creeping dread of poison gas or starvation.
Bombing.
Exactly. That anticipation is often more dangerous, or at least more immediately destructive, than the war itself.
Yeah, people were just so terrified of what might happen to the things they love that they destroyed them just to seize back like a tiny fraction of control.
It's an attempt to manage the unmanageable.
Right. And welcome to the deep dive. Today, we have a really highly specific mission for you. We are going to trace the profound emotional anatomy of losing everything.
And we're doing this by stepping into the incredibly rich historical character study found within the text, Alice Conyngam's War.
Which is such a fascinating read.
It really is a remarkable text. I mean, it fundamentally shifts our perspective of conflict. We're examining the life of this 21-year-old woman, Alice Conyngham.
Right, and the year is 1939.
Yeah. So this is a woman who first loses her husband to a brutal murder, and then, piece by agonizing piece, she loses her future, her sanctuary, her property, and her people.
But she doesn't lose them to enemy fire.
No, she doesn't. She loses them to the encroaching, suffocating bureaucracy of the Second World War.
Yeah.
We're looking at the home front not as this place of, mere rationing and stoicism like the propaganda posters show, but as a landscape of immense psychological trauma.
And anticipatory grief.
Exactly. And ultimately, the unexpected liberation found in absolute surrender.
So imagine standing in your own home, the sanctuary you meticulously built, and some polite man with a clipboard just walks up and tells you it no longer belongs to you.
It's a profound violation.
What do you do with that anger? How do you survive when your entire identity, your whole world, is just systematically dismantled by forces totally outside of your control?
That is the core tension we're exploring today.
Yeah, and we start our timeline at the absolute epicenter of Alice's trauma. It's March 1939. We're standing in the quiet, damp churchyard of St. Andrew's Church in Shepherd's Well, Kent.
Right.
It's been exactly 1 year since Alice's husband, Lawrence, was brutally murdered in a Fleet Street alleyway.
And they'd only been married for 8 months.
Just heartbreaking. And now Alice is standing at his grave, unveiling his limestone headstone.
And the physical tableau of this scene, I mean, the author paints it so vividly. It is suffocating.
Yeah, she's what, 21 years old?
21, clutching this bouquet of lilies to her chest, and she's just completely paralyzed.
Frozen.
Right. She's surrounded by her parents, Sir Arthur and Nanette, and Lawrence's best friend, Brantley Fuller.
Hmm?
And the Reverend is reading from Revelation, and God shall wipe away all tears.
Yeah. But the ritual is totally hollow for her.
Completely empty. When she kneels to place the flowers, she stays too long. The silence just stretches out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, her mother actually has to step forward and physically touch her elbow just to, lift her away from the dirt.
It really reminds me of, well, she's not just grieving. She's dealing with a phantom limb.
That's a great analogy.
You know, like when you watch an amputee reach for a cup with a hand they no longer have? That is exactly how Alice is living her life.
Yes.
She is operating her entire daily existence as if Lawrence is simply in the next room. She's maintaining his massive 1,500-acre estate, Wheatcroft Manor, to the exact specifications he preferred.
Down to the letter.
Down to the letter. She is meticulously keeping up his prized racing stables, which house, 7 highly valuable thoroughbreds. She retains the exact same staff.
She even reads the Times every single morning.
Right. Simply because it was Lawrence's newspaper of choice. She is literally physically animating his ghost by keeping his world in perfect working order.
But, an amputee eventually recognizes the arm is gone.
Yeah.
Alice is actively trying to grow the arm back by keeping these stables immaculate. And the friction between her internal reality and the external societal expectations of 1939, it's enormous.
Because society expects her to move on.
Exactly. The societal calendar of grief dictates that after a year, the widow's weeds are put away.
Time's up.
Right. Her parents, Sir Arthur and Nanette, are heavily pressuring her to sell the estate, move to a comfortable flat in London, find a nice young man, and resume the trajectory of a normal upper-class woman.
And Alice's reaction to that pressure is incredibly sharp. I mean, you see it on the drive back to the manor from the churchyard.
It's with Brantley.
With Brantley. So Brantley, the best friend, is driving his Humber Super Snipe. Now, Brantley is a former cricket player, a guy who used to race Alfa Romeos at Brooklands at 135 miles an hour.
He's a thrill seeker.
Totally. But today, out of respect for the solemnity of the memorial, he's driving at a crawling 30 miles per hour. And Alice absolutely snaps at him.
She really goes for the jugular.
She asks him why he's driving like the village idiot. She literally tells him, Lawrence is dead. We've all got to get on with it now, haven't we?
Which is so layered.
Yeah, she is weaponizing etiquette to keep everyone at arm's length.
And she uses that brittle, defensive anger because any genuine acknowledgement of her parents' advice feels like a betrayal.
Betrayal of Lawrence.
Right. We have to look at the timeline she lost. The text reveals that she and Lawrence were actively trying for a family.
Yeah, they had it all mapped out.
A boy for him, a girl for her. That entire biological and emotional destiny was violently erased in that Fleet Street alleyway.
So moving on isn't recovery.
No, moving to London and finding a new husband isn't a recovery for Alice. It is an active participation in the erasure of Lawrence's memory.
Which brings us to lunch at the manor. And the tension here just vibrates off the page. Alice offers her mother a glass of Chateau Léoville Barton 59 while they're eating game pie.
It's so formal.
It's this incredibly heavy, suffocating formality of upper-class hospitality. She's using the silver and the crystal as a shield.
A literal barricade.
But her father, Sir Arthur, pierces right through it. He's ruthless.
He really is. He accuses her of becoming a Miss Havisham.
Right. The Dickens character.
Yes. He tells her she's freezing her grief and wearing it with tragic dignity, just like the character who stopped the clocks the moment she was jilted and lived in her decaying wedding dress.
That is brutal.
It's brutal, but from a purely psychological standpoint, it is a highly accurate diagnosis of her state. She has stopped the clocks at Wheatcroft Manor. She is performing a ritual of preservation.
See, I understand the emotional math there, but I look at her keeping these 1,500 acres pristine, and I just see a massive act of self-sabotage.
How so?
I mean, let's look at this objectively. How can a 21-year-old widow realistically defend a massive Victorian estate against a looming global war with barely any staff?
It's a huge undertaking.
She has these 7 thoroughbreds, plus her 2 personal horses, Rogue and Phantom. And she absolutely refuses her parents' pleas to sell and move to their home in Winchester. She is anchoring herself to a ship that is squarely in the path of a hurricane.
Well, you see self-sabotage because you're looking at the logistics.
Exactly.
But if you look at the psychology of her grief, she's performing a highly rational act of preservation. And to understand why she's so fiercely, almost irrationally dedicated to Wheatcroft, we must unpack the mechanism of transgenerational trauma operating in her family.
Right, because this isn't just about Lawrence.
Exactly. Alice grew up in the shadow of complete financial and social ruin. The text gives us the history of the Fernsby estate, her family's ancestral home. Before the First World War, it was a prosperous 15,000-acre powerhouse.
But the Great War just hollowed it out.
Completely.
The text details the labor shortages, the plummeting agricultural prices, the crushing estate taxes, and the massive upkeep costs that basically decimated the family fortune.
It was a very common story for the aristocracy then.
Yeah, and by the late 1930s, Sir Arthur's grand Georgian manor is quite literally falling apart. I mean, ivy is consuming the West Wing, the chimneys are leaning dangerously, and the family is huddled into just 6 rooms out of this entire massive house.
And Alice grew up watching her father's dignity erode. She watched a global conflict strip her family of its legacy and its status.
She actually says that, right?
Yes, she specifically tells her father, "I am aware of our family history. I know the First World War brought disaster on us." Trauma alters a family's operating system across generations.
Wow.
Alice has internalized the lesson that war steals your identity by stealing your land.
So she's overcompensating.
She is absolutely determined not to let the Conyngham legacy suffer that exact same humiliating fate. In her mind, if the stables fail, she repeats her father's failure, and Lawrence dies a second time.
So she builds this emotional fortress. She conflates the preservation of property with the preservation of memory.
Yes.
But the problem with anchoring your soul to physical architecture is that architecture is entirely vulnerable to the outside world.
Always.
And the outside world of 1939 is closing in fast. We see this tension so beautifully illustrated in that pivotal scene at the Waldorf's Palm Court in London. Alice meets Brantley for lunch.
And the sensory contrast in this scene is just mind-blowing.
It really is. The author uses environmental contrast to highlight Alice's internal denial.
Inside the Palm Court, they're sitting inside this gilded Edwardian bubble,
Right under an ornate glass dome.
surrounded by cream and gold pillars. The waiters are serving poached chicken breast in a delicate white sauce with mushrooms. A string quartet is softly playing the romantic jazz standard, "These Foolish Things."
It's like the absolute pinnacle of civilized, insulated elegance.
And outside on Aldwych, the reality of Europe is bleeding into the streets.
Yeah, delivery boys are shouting headlines about Germany seizing Czechoslovakia. Pedestrians are walking around carrying these bulky cardboard respirator boxes.
The gas masks.
Gas masks.
Yeah.
Local councils are out there painting the curbs white so people can find their way during the impending blackouts, and they're digging air raid shelters in the public parks.
And Brantley sits across from her in this shimmering dining room, acting as the harbinger of that outside reality.
Yeah.
We really need to look closely at Brantley.
He's such an interesting character.
He works for MI5. He reads the intelligence reports. He knows exactly what is coming. But more importantly, he carries his own physical reminder of sudden violence.
Right, from the attack.
He was with Lawrence in that alleyway. The attacker slashed Brantley's ulnar nerve. He is left with a curled hand, chronic pain, and the complete destruction of his athletic future. Brantley knows that fortresses fall.
And he bluntly warns her that this elegant world is ending. He looks around the Palm Court and tells her, if this is the last summer of our lives as we know them, let's drink to it.
It's a chilling line.
Very chilling. And he explicitly warns her that her estate will become a target, not just for German bombs, but for British requisitioning.
Because the government is going to need land.
Exactly. And Wheatcroft is prime real estate.
He's trying to force her to see that the physical environment she relies on for emotional stability is about to become the most unstable element of her life. He's actively challenging her cognitive dissonance.
But she refuses to internalize it. She tells him she's more afraid of what the war will do to the people she cares about than the war itself.
Which is incredibly naive.
Yeah, she thinks she can just close the gates of Wheatcroft and weather the storm. But the storm doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in the summer of 1939. And it arrives as this slow, agonizing drip of inevitability.
This period is a masterclass in the psychological toll of anticipatory loss.
Let's talk about that.
Anticipatory trauma is fascinating because the body and the mind react to the threat of destruction with the same intensity as the destruction itself.
Even though nothing has happened yet.
Right. The war hasn't been declared. There are no sirens. But the tension of waiting begins to dismantle Alice's peace.
It's kind of like standing on a beach and watching a tidal wave pull the water back.
That's a very evocative way to put it.
You know, the devastation hasn't hit you yet, but the eerie, unnatural shifts in your daily life signal that total destruction is absolutely inevitable. The ocean floor is suddenly exposed, and everything just feels wrong.
Yes.
And for Alice, that exposed ocean floor is revealed during a visit from her veterinarian, Mr. Hayworth.
Mr. Hayworth's visit is the exact moment the external panic breaches the walls of her estate. He arrives after a massive summer storm, and he brings news that just shatters her isolation. We mentioned the pet call at the very beginning of our discussion.
Right.
Hayworth tells Alice that his veterinary practice has been completely inundated with requests to euthanize healthy family animals.
It is deeply disturbing. He tells her he has actually run out of sodium pentobarbital. He is putting down cats and dogs all day long because people are terrified of the anticipated food rationing and bombings.
They're preemptively grieving by taking control of the loss.
Exactly. And then Hayworth turns his focus to Alice's prized racehorses. He warns her that her beautiful, high-strung thoroughbreds might be sold off or requisitioned for military service to pull artillery, just as they were in World War I.
This forces the reality of violence directly into her domestic space.
She is horrified.
Completely, she says, "These are my husband's life's work." To think of these poor creatures yoked to cannons or marching across muddy fields, that's a betrayal.
Yeah.
She views the requisitioning of the horses not as a patriotic duty, but as a desecration of Lawrence's memory.
And the state's preparation for war is just everywhere now. The government has already distributed gas masks, these clumsy, ugly cardboard boxes. But Alice absolutely refuses to carry hers.
She leaves it hidden in a cupboard.
Right, because carrying the gas mask means accepting the reality of the threat. And accepting the threat means accepting that her fortress is penetrable.
She is actively resisting the physical props of the war because they contradict her internal narrative of safety.
Like Brantley's mask.
Exactly. She asks Brantley later why he carries his mask, and he admits it's largely propaganda. It's a performance of readiness ordered by his superiors to set an example for the public and manage their fear. But Alice refuses to perform for the state.
But the reality keeps dripping in. Every conversation becomes a countdown. She walks into the hayshed and finds her two young stable boys, Tom and Bob, huddled together in the shadows.
Because they've received their warning letters.
Yeah. The moment war is declared, they will be drafted into the army. The human infrastructure of her fortress is already crumbling.
Even the landscape itself becomes threatening. Consider the scene where she takes Brantley riding into the ancient lower wood on the estate.
Right, the trees there are hundreds of years old. And as they're riding, the wind whistles eerily through the branches, and Brantley warns her that the government might chop down these very trees for the war effort, to use for trench timbers and pit props, just as they did in 1914.
Alice doesn't break down in tears at this.
No, she responds with this fierce, almost vibrating defiance. She grips her reins, her knuckles turn white, and she declares that she will not let Whitehall bureaucrats dictate her life or destroy her woods.
She's furious.
She tells him, "Do you think this estate, these woods, my life, are theirs to command?"
Her defiance is magnificent, but it is ultimately tragically naive. She still believes that her individual will can withstand the machinery of a nation mobilizing for total war.
Which is impossible.
Exactly. But that defiant independence in the woods couldn't last, because on September 3, 1939, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain formally announces that Britain is at war with Germany.
The abstract threat becomes a legal reality.
The tidal wave finally hits the beach.
And it doesn't arrive with a dramatic explosion on her lawn. The battlefront comes directly to her doorstep in the form of a man with a clipboard.
Enter Mr. Hugh Bletchley.
Yes, Bletchley. He's an official from the War Agricultural Executive Committee. He's not a cartoon villain. He's just an irascible, hyper-efficient bureaucrat who is driven down from Whitehall to enforce the Emergency Powers Defense Act.
And Bletchley represents the complete suspension of Alice's civil liberties regarding her property.
Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. The Emergency Powers Act gave the government sweeping authority to requisition land, control agriculture, and manage resources for the war effort.
Just unilaterally?
Yes. Bletchley surveys her pristine, beloved stables and bluntly informs her that raising racehorses is a frivolity in wartime.
His words are just devastating. He tells her, Your husband's legacy cannot be allowed to stand idle in a time of national need. We are not in mourning, we are in mobilization.
Which completely invalidates her entire existence over the past year.
Yeah, and he informs her that her beautiful brick stables, the one she has kept immaculate as a shrine to Lawrence, are being requisitioned for the Royal Engineers to build a gun emplacement.
We really need to analyze the specific type of trauma this inflicts. This is legal misappropriation.
Right.
When an enemy soldier attacks your home, the dynamic is brutally clear. It's an act of hostile aggression. Your anger is entirely justified by the rules of conflict, and your resistance is heroic.
You're fighting the bad guys.
But with legal misappropriation, the violation is sanctioned by your own society.
You're told the theft of your sanctuary is for your own good. You are stripped of your right to righteous anger. Alice is experiencing an intense emotional violation, but she isn't fighting Nazis. She's fighting emergency powers, civil defense laws, and local agricultural committees.
Exactly. And if she resists, she isn't a hero. She's selfish, unpatriotic, or, as the local vicar later warns her, a shirker.
The bureaucratic machinery operates to completely strip the individual of their agency. Bletchley doesn't care about her grief. The state does not recognize emotional fortresses. It only recognizes acreage and utility.
And the humiliation she feels is palpable when she's forced to vacate those stables.
Oh, it's terrible. She has to move her incredible high-strung thoroughbreds out of their beautiful oak-partitioned stalls and into this hastily erected, flimsy, corrugated iron shed on the very edge of the property.
Such a downgrade.
The text describes the sharp, metallic smell of the raw iron and the suffocating heat inside. Alice feels that this crude, ugly shed diminishes the horses, and by extension, diminishes Lawrence's memory and diminishes her.
It is a physical manifestation of her massive loss of status and control. But the state's appetite is insatiable.
Right. The government comes back just weeks later and requisitions the temporary iron stable, too.
They take everything.
They need it for storage. They are literally pushing her off her own land, foot by foot. And this leads to one of the most fascinating, desperate, and tragically absurd details in the entire narrative. Alice absolutely refuses to give up her two personal horses, Rogue and Phantom.
Because they have nowhere else to go.
Right. So what does she do? She moves them into the manor house.
It is an act of profound, desperate rebellion.
It is brilliant and tragicomic. She enlists her loyal maid, Hester, the young stable girl, Sarah, and the local funeral director's 15-year-old son. Together, they physically lead these massive, nervous horses through the French windows and into the old servants' dining room in the east wing of the house.
I can barely picture it.
They build improvised wooden troughs. The text describes the surreal sensory collision in that room, the smell of lavender floor polish mixing heavily with hay and horse manure. Its domesticity violently colliding with wartime desperation.
But look at the psychological geometry of what she has done here. She has retreated from the outer perimeter of the estate, fallen back from the outbuildings, and drawn the walls of her fortress tightly around the actual physical structure of her dwelling.
It is a literal shrinking of her world.
Yes, she's bringing the very last vestiges of Lawrence's legacy into her living room, because it's the only space she still controls.
But the loss of physical space is only the beginning of her dismantling. Because a fortress isn't just made of stone, wood, and land, it's made of the people who man the walls.
And the war is coming for them, too.
The emotional attrition really begins to grind Alice down through the systematic hollowing out of her household.
Because when you lose your land, you lose your wealth. But when you lose your people, you lose your purpose.
Yeah.
Alice is fundamentally losing her role as a protector. When she managed the estate, she provided livelihoods, shelter, and order for her staff. She was the sovereign. Now she is becoming merely the manager of her own isolation.
The departures happen one by one. First, it's the men. Tom and Bob, the young stable hands we saw hiding in the hayshed, are officially called up to the military.
Then the gardener is drafted.
Then the women begin to leave. Betsy, the young kitchen maid, abruptly gives her notice. She has seen the vibrant, patriotic posters for the Women's Land Army. She tells Alice she wants to work out in the fields under the sky because she wants to feel properly useful.
And the sting of that phrase, properly useful, it cuts Alice to the bone.
Because Alice isn't feeling useful at all.
Right. Alice is desperately expending all her energy trying to be useful by preserving the past, while her staff is leaving to secure the future. Betsy's departure really highlights the futility of Alice's project.
Every departure is a fresh grieving process. But the hardest departure of all is Hester's family. Hester is Alice's devoted maid, but the relationship is much deeper than employer and servant.
They're exactly the same age.
Right. They share a quiet, profound familiarity. Hester's children play in the corridors of the manor, and their laughter brings a vital warmth to Alice's cold existence.
But as the threat of bombing becomes undeniable, especially after the news of the first German air raids on British soil and the terrifying reports of British ships being sunk in the Atlantic, Alice makes a devastating choice.
She essentially forces Hester to evacuate her young children along with Hester's crippled sister, Olive.
To get them out of harm's way.
Yeah, Alice arranges for them to go live with her own parents down in Cornwall, far away from the strategic targets of Kent. She even has to send her 7 prized thoroughbred racehorses down to Cornwall as well, because the estate simply has no feed or space to sustain them anymore.
She's packing up everything she loves and shipping it away.
It's a complete evacuation of her emotional anchors. She is actively participating in the dismantling of her own family.
She's like a captain who refuses to abandon a sinking ship.
Yes. But instead of the ship going down in one dramatic plunge, the crew is slowly, methodically being taken off on lifeboats. One by one, they row away, leaving her standing alone on the deck, trying to manage this massive, echoing, empty vessel.
And as her chosen family is stripped away, her physical estate is simultaneously being repopulated by absolute strangers.
The juxtaposition is incredibly jarring. It's deeply isolating. The quiet fields are suddenly crawling with soldiers digging trenches. The RAF sets up a secretive listening station on the edge of her woods, erecting tall, spindly radio masts that hum and crackle in the night.
The Women's Timber Corps arrives with trucks and axes to systematically chop down her marked ancient trees.
She is completely surrounded by people, yet she has never been more isolated. The text notes how her grief fundamentally evolves here. It shifts from the acute, sharp, paralyzing trauma of Lawrence's sudden murder to a chronic, grinding attrition of her daily life.
She's being worn down to the nub.
You see this chronic pain so clearly in the taxi scene. When the taxi arrives to take Hester's children and Olive to the train station for Cornwall, Alice meticulously manages the packing. She fusses over woolen stockings, checking the weave. She folds blankets. She checks their sturdy boots.
She gives them instructions with this calm, measured, almost robotic patience.
Why does she focus so intently on the physical objects?
Because compartmentalization is the only tool she has left. Managing logistics is the only way she can control the agonizing emotional pain of the separation.
Keep the hands busy so the mind doesn't wander.
Precisely. If she focuses her entire mind on the buttons of a child's coat, she doesn't have to focus on the fact that her house is about to become entirely silent.
But compartmentalization requires massive amounts of psychological energy. You can only hold the dam back for so long before the cracks appear. And Alice is running out of energy. The hollowing out is complete.
Now comes the final blow to the fortress.
Late in the winter of 1939, Alice is sitting alone in her drawing room when Hester, who stayed behind, hands her a heavy, cream-colored envelope.
And the physical description of the letter emphasizes its undeniable authority. It doesn't have a stamp. It's franked with the red insignia of His Majesty's service. It bears an official watermark that catches the light.
It is the state, codified in paper, arriving to claim what is left.
Yes. The letter announces the impending arrival of Captain Reginald H. Frobisher of the Royal Engineers.
He's been appointed field liaison officer, and he is coming to formally requisition Coombs Field and Warden's Hill. Now, Warden's Hill is the highest point on the estate. It offers a clear strategic line of sight all the way to the English Channel.
It is absolutely perfect for an anti-aircraft emplacement.
But emotionally, Warden's Hill is something else entirely.
Emotionally, Warden's Hill was Lawrence's sanctuary. It was his favorite riding spot. He used to ride up there at dawn. He called it his cathedral.
So the state is coming to requisition her cathedral, the last sacred space. Alice reads this letter. She pours herself a measure of brandy. She lights a cigarette, and she sits in the silence of her ticking clock.
And suddenly, she experiences a profound, entirely unexpected feeling.
Yeah, she doesn't feel the familiar dread. She doesn't feel the righteous outrage she felt in the woods with Brantley. She feels liberation.
This is a brilliant psychological pivot, and it really challenges our conventional understanding of resilience.
How so?
Well, on the surface, feeling relief in the face of ultimate defeat makes no sense. But it makes perfect sense when you understand the mechanics of resistance. For over a year and a half, Alice has been playing the sovereign of Wheatcroft.
Standing guard.
Right. She has stood guard against all intruders. Her parents, the vet, the bureaucrats, the war itself. She has expended every ounce of her soul's energy fighting to preserve a frozen past.
She's been holding back the ocean with a broom, and her arms are just dead tired.
Exactly. The burden of resistance has finally become heavier than the act of surrendering. She realizes in this quiet moment with the brandy and the letter that she has been fighting the entire weight of the British government.
It's a machine too vast.
Too vast, too hungry, and too powerful to be opposed by one grieving 21-year-old woman.
The fight is fundamentally unwinnable.
And the liberation comes from the profound realization that surrendering the physical land doesn't mean she loses Lawrence's legacy or his memory. It means she no longer has to exhaust her soul defending the indefensible.
That is so freeing.
It is. True resilience in this specific context doesn't look like fighting to the bitter end. It looks like having the wisdom to give up the fight you cannot win in order to save your remaining energy for the life you still have to live.
Giving up the fight you cannot win to save your energy for the life you still have. That is incredibly powerful, and it shifts her demeanor entirely. When Captain Frobisher actually arrives, the tension is completely diffused.
And Frobisher isn't a monster either.
No, he's a nervous, methodical man who constantly touches his breast pocket to check his pen. He actually apologizes to her. He tells her that his own family's farmland down in Southampton has been taken for tank training and completely flattened for a munitions dump.
Frobisher humanizes the machinery of war. He reminds her that the war is touching everyone, destroying everyone's sanctuaries with equal indifference.
So she gives up. She surrenders Warden's Hill. She watches them dig trenches in her husband's cathedral. But she doesn't break.
Right, she bends.
Exactly. I look at her interaction with Frobisher and I see a woman who bends but absolutely refuses to be shattered, because right after she shows him the property lines, she looks at him and says, "If you can use my land for war, I can use my house for mercy."
A phenomenal line.
She informs him that she's going to take in evacuees. Mothers and children from London, displaced families from the village. She has the empty bedrooms, she has the space, and she has the time.
That is the real turning point of her recovery. She replaces the passive, exhausting act of preservation with the active, nourishing act of contribution.
She stops looking backward.
Right. She transitions from being a curator of a museum dedicated to the dead to a participant in a living, breathing, suffering society.
She unlocks the gates. And this internal shift, this newly found capacity to engage with the present, it perfectly sets the stage for the culmination of her emotional arc. This happens when Brantley returns to Wheatcroft on a few days' leave in November.
The scene at the Shepherd's Well train station is deeply atmospheric. It's pure cinema.
Oh, it really is. It's drizzling rain. The platform is crowded with soldiers in heavy khaki greatcoats, smoking and joking, filling the damp air with the smell of wet wool and cheap pipe tobacco.
Brantley steps off the train carrying a small case, his limp slightly more visible from exhaustion.
And when he sees Alice waiting for him with the horse trap, he stops. He looks at her and says, "I thought I'd be stepping off into a different world, but it's you waiting, and that makes it all bearable."
But Brantley brings the emotional weight of the war back with him. He is not the dashing man who drove Alfa Romeos anymore.
No.
He has been working deep in an underground bunker in London. He has been interrogating fifth columnist saboteurs and spies living normal lives in England. He has seen the absolute worst of human betrayal, and he is deeply disillusioned.
He is spiritually exhausted. That evening, they are sitting by the fire in the drawing room. The blackout curtains are tightly drawn across the French windows, completely sealing them off from the dark, war-torn world outside.
Just the two of them.
The firelight is casting long shadows. And Brantley awkwardly confesses something. He tells her he has been seeing a woman named Angela, a typist, at his MI5 office.
But he admits he is utterly miserable.
Right. Alice asks him why he's so down in the mouth if he likes this girl. And Brantley looks at her and says, "Because she's not you."
And Alice doesn't pull away like she would have a year ago.
No, she doesn't weaponize etiquette this time. She walks over to him, looks him in the eye, and Brantley speaks directly to the absolute core of her grief. He says, "Alice, I keep thinking about what you and Lawrence never had, the little life you might have brought into the world. I can't give you what was lost, but I hope in time you might accept what is."
Accept what is. That is the ultimate antithesis of frozen grief.
Because frozen grief demands that we resurrect what was.
Right. Acceptance allows us to engage with what remains. Brantley is offering her a deeply imperfect, scarred future, but it is a real future.
And Alice replies, I've learned this year that life never unfolds the way we meticulously plan it, and that comfort can be found in the ruins of our original dreams.
It is a breathtaking moment of fragile hope.
It really is. We have spent this deep dive tracing the profound emotional arc of Alice Conyngham. She began 1939 completely trapped in the amber of her widowhood, using her massive estate and her strict adherence to etiquette as a fortress to fight off the reality of her loss.
She fought with incredible tenacity to preserve a frozen past.
Yeah.
But through the relentless bureaucratic and human losses inflicted by the onset of the Second World War, the pet culls that foreshadowed the terror, the draft notices that emptied her staff, the requisitioning of her stables and her sacred land, the evacuation of her chosen family, she was systematically stripped of her illusions of control.
The war dismantled her fortress brick by brick. Yet in losing all the physical and logistical control she fought so hard to maintain, she found the grace to surrender.
She realized that yielding to the inevitable wasn't a betrayal of her murdered husband.
No, it was a necessary step for her own survival. And in the ruins of her original dreams, she found the courage to open her heart to a different, deeply imperfect future with Brantley. She learned that true survival requires adaptation, not just preservation. And that leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over. We opened this deep dive talking about fortresses, how we build thick walls and deep moats to keep the enemy out. When you face immense loss, it is your most natural instinct to build a psychological fortress to protect whatever fragile pieces of your heart are left.
It's what we all do.
But consider Alice's journey. Is it possible that the fortress itself becomes the primary source of your suffering? When you spend all your energy defending your walls against the inevitable tides of change, you trap yourself in the dark. Perhaps true emotional survival doesn't come from successfully defending the walls against the world. Perhaps it comes from having the terrifying courage to unlock the gates, let the world in, and see what entirely new life can be built in the spaces left behind.